The wind carried dust and sorrow across the prairie, swirling through the remnants of a wagon train that had once been a lifeline. Now, it was nothing but a cruel memory. The last wool tracks faded into the dry earth, leading westward towards safety. But not for them. Not for the woman clutching her child's hand as they stood alone, abandoned beneath the vast, indifferent sky. Her name was Eliza Warren, a widow, a mother, and now, something else entirely, a woman left to die by the very people she had once trusted. She did not scream. Screaming would do no good. The settlers were gone, their dust settling, their decision made. Eliza stared after them, the weight of their cruelty settling into her bones like an early frost. Beside her, little Margaret, Maggie, barely 7 years old, whimpered, her tiny hand trembling in Eliza's grip. "Mama, why did they leave us?" Eliza squeezed her fingers tight, willing herself to be strong. "Because they are cowards," she said, her voice steady, though her throat burned with unshed tears. It had happened quickly, too quickly. There had been whispers around the fire the night before, low voices, worried tones. The wagon master, Thomas Wren, had argued with the others, talking of the hard winter ahead, the dwindling supplies, the dangers of Indians and outlaws. Eliza had known they looked at her and Maggie differently after her husband died, less like kin, more like burdens. That morning, the decision had been made. She had barely stirred from her bedroll when they came. "You'll never make it. Not with the child," Wren had said, his face a mask of false regret. "We have to think of the whole group. It's not personal. Not personal." Yet he had taken the last of their food, their extra water, their horse. He had left them with a few blankets and a half-empty canteen, as if that would be enough. Then they rode away, leaving only the sound of wagon wheels creaking into the distance. Eliza had not begged. She had not wept. She had only stood there, Maggie pressed against her skirts, as the last of them disappeared into the horizon. Now the sun burned high overhead, the heat pressing down on them. The prairie stretched for miles in every direction, an unbroken sea of golden grass. Somewhere out there, wolves prowled. Somewhere, men even worse than wolves rode under the cover of night. She took a slow breath, pushing aside the panic clawing at her chest. Panic was useless. It would not feed Maggie. It would not get them to water. "We walk," she said. Maggie looked up at her, blue eyes wide. "Where?" Eliza scanned the horizon, searching for anything, trees, a stream, the faintest promise of shade. Nothing but endless land, the sky too large, too empty. "Somewhere safer than here," she said. The first hour passed in silence. Maggie trudged beside her, quiet, obedient. Too obedient. It wasn't natural for a child to be so still. "Tell me a story, Mama," she finally whispered. Eliza swallowed. Her mouth was dry, her lips already cracked. She thought of the stories she used to tell by firelight, of heroes and faraway castles, of gallant riders and princesses who never wept. But fairy tales had no place here. So she told the truth. Once, there was a woman and her daughter. They were left behind by people too weak to carry them. But the woman was strong, stronger than the cowards who abandoned her. She would not lie down and die. Maggie's fingers tightened around hers. What happened to them? Eliza kept her eyes on the horizon. They survived. The prairie did not care for promises. By late afternoon, Maggie stumbled, her little legs giving way. Eliza caught her, lifted her onto her hip, though her own limbs ached. Ahead, a dark shape rose from the landscape. A tree, a single, lonely tree standing in defiance of the open land. She pressed forward. Her legs burned. Her head throbbed. The canteen was nearly empty. Still, she did not stop until they reached the dry, twisted branches, the meager shade stretching long in the dying light. She eased Maggie down and gave her the last of the water. The girl sipped slowly, blinking up at her with exhaustion. "Sleep," Eliza murmured, smoothing her daughter's tangled hair. The sun dipped lower. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that sank into her bones. And in the distance, something howled. Her hand tightened on the knife at her hip. A pitiful thing, meant for cutting cloth or peeling apples, not for fighting off the dangers that lurked beyond the firelight. There was no firelight now. She did not sleep. By dawn, hunger gnawed at her ribs. Maggie stirred beside her, shivering. Eliza forced herself to her feet. The world had not changed overnight. The wagons had not returned. The land was still empty. She had to find food. She left Maggie beneath the tree, her heart clenching with every step away. There was no choice. If she did not find something, anything, Maggie would not last another day. The land yielded little. A few brittle roots, dug from the hard soil with her bare hands. Bitter, barely edible, but enough to keep moving. She turned back toward the tree, toward Maggie. Then she heard it. A voice. Not the wind. Not an animal. A voice, rough and low, speaking words she could not understand. Eliza froze. Two figures on horseback emerged from the tall grass. Warriors. Cheyenne, by their dress, their paint, their long dark braids. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Stories flooded her mind. Stories of raids, of settlers taken, of women who disappeared into the wilderness and were never seen again. She did not run. Running would do no good. She had no horse, no strength. And Maggie was still under the tree. One of the men dismounted, stepping closer. His gaze was unreadable, dark eyes studying her with something that was not cruelty, but not kindness either. He spoke, the language unfamiliar, the cadence like the wind through the grass. Then, in halting English, "You alone?" Eliza swallowed hard. "My daughter," she forced out. "She's—" The man raised a hand, and she fell silent. He turned to the other warrior, said something low and quick. The second man rode ahead toward the tree. Panic surged in Eliza's chest. She took a step forward, but the first man held up a hand, stopping her. She glared at him, her fingers gripping the useless knife at her waist. If they meant to take Maggie, but then from the tree a cry. Maggie's cry. Eliza shoved past the warrior and ran. Maggie was awake, pressed against the base of the tree, eyes wide with terror as the second warrior loomed over her. But he had not touched her. He only looked, his expression unreadable. Eliza reached her daughter, pulling her close. She turned, breathing hard, ready to fight, ready to— The first man stood there, watching. Then he pointed to his horse. "Come." A single word, a command, or an offer. Eliza stared at him, at the other warrior, at the endless land stretching beyond them. She could refuse. She could stay. But staying meant death. Her grip on Maggie tightened. Then she nodded. The warrior mounted his horse, holding out a hand. Hesitation burned through her, but she took it, letting him pull her up behind him. Maggie clung to her as the horse turned, and then they were moving, the wind sweeping through her hair, the prairie rolling past. Whatever lay ahead, she did not know, but she would not die here. The horse's steady rhythm carried them deeper into the prairie, the wind cutting across the land in slow, hollow breaths. Eliza held Maggie tightly against her, the child's fingers buried in the folds of her dress. The warrior riding ahead did not look back, his dark braid trailing down his back, his posture easy yet watchful. The one she rode with was silent, his body rigid, his hands steady on the reins. She did not know their names. She did not know where they were taking her. But she knew one thing: this was not charity. The Cheyenne were a people of warriors, feared by settlers for their raids, for the battles whispered about in frontier towns. Eliza had heard the stories: women stolen, children lost, men left in pieces on the plains. But fear was a luxury she could not afford. Fear would not keep Maggie safe. They rode until the sun sagged low, spilling red light over the land. Finally, they slowed near a rise where the land dipped into a small creek bed, the water low but clear. The lead warrior dismounted first, speaking in a low tone to the one behind her. She did not understand their words, but she recognized the weight of them. Decisions. Orders. Then the man she rode with turned to her. Down. She hesitated, but there was no room for refusal. She slid off, clutching Maggie as her legs wobbled from the long ride. The warrior gave her a long look before swinging down himself. Maggie clung to her skirts, peering up at the men with wide, unblinking eyes. She was afraid, but she had not cried, not since the morning they had been left behind. The second warrior knelt by the creek, filling a small leather skin. Then he stood and walked toward them, holding it out. Eliza met his gaze. His face was lined, weathered by sun and war, but his eyes were sharp, measuring, testing. She took the water skin, keeping her movements slow, deliberate. She lifted it to Maggie's lips first, letting her drink, watching the men's reaction. They did not stop her. When Maggie had taken her fill, Eliza drank too, the water cool against her raw throat. Then she handed it back. The older warrior took it without a word and returned to the creek. Eliza turned to the one who had carried her. "Where are you taking us?" He did not answer. She took a step closer, her exhaustion burned away by the weight of uncertainty. "Are we prisoners?" The warrior's gaze flicked to her, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, voice low and firm. "You are here. You are not dead. That is enough." She bristled. For now, a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not amusement, not cruelty, a quiet acknowledgement. Then he turned away, moving toward the horses, leaving her with her questions and no answers. That night, they built a small fire. Not large, not reckless, just enough to keep the night at bay. The two warriors sat across from her, speaking in their own tongue, their voices a steady rhythm against the crackle of flame. Eliza sat close to Maggie, brushing her fingers through her daughter's tangled hair. The girl had finally fallen asleep, exhaustion winning over fear. She watched the warriors carefully, studying the way they spoke without raising their voices, how they moved with a kind of quiet certainty. They did not argue. They did not hesitate. She could not afford to be blind to what they were. Warriors, survivors, and yet they had not harmed her. Finally, the younger warrior, the one who had carried her, turned his gaze to her. "You fight," he said simply. Eliza's fingers tensed against Maggie's hair. "If I have to." His head tilted slightly, considering her. "You have to." There was no mockery in his tone, just truth. She studied him in turn. "You fight too." He did not deny it. A long silence stretched between them before he finally spoke again. "My name is Wadi." The first gift he had given her, a name. She let it settle between them before answering. "Eliza." She glanced at her sleeping daughter. "Margaret." Wadi nodded once, as if filing the information away. Then he turned back to the fire. Eliza did not sleep easily that night. By morning, the wind had shifted, carrying the scent of something far away. Smoke. Not campfire smoke. Something heavier, tinged with distant ruin. The older warrior, who Wadi called Toka, stood first, scanning the horizon. His jaw tightened. "El Shatavo," he said sharply. Eliza did not need to know the words to understand their meaning. "Danger." Wadi moved quickly, kicking dirt over the fire before turning to her. "We ride." Eliza hoisted Maggie onto her hip, her pulse quickening. "Who is it?" Toka was already mounting his horse, his expression grim. "Men who will not leave you behind. They will take you with them." She swallowed hard. "What kind of men?" Wadi's gaze locked onto hers, the firelight gone from his eyes. "The kind who do not leave women breathing." The words settled over her like ice. She did not argue. The ride was faster this time, cutting through the prairie in urgent strides. The sky churned with storm-colored clouds, the sun swallowed by their heavy descent. Maggie clung to her, face buried in Eliza's dress, her small body stiff with fear. They rode until they reached a rocky outcrop, a rise in the land that overlooked the stretch of prairie they had left behind. Wadi reined in his horse, Toka beside him. Below, the dust churned. Riders. 5, maybe 6. Eliza felt her stomach tighten. They weren't settlers. Their clothing was ragged, their horses lean, their movements erratic. She had seen men like them before in the trading posts. Outlaws with nothing left to lose, men who thrived on the suffering of others. One of them held a rifle across his saddle. Another laughed, his voice sharp against the wind. They were tracking something. They were tracking her. Eliza's breath hitched. They had followed the wagon trail. They had found the place where she and Maggie had been left. And now they were following the only tracks leading away. Wadi turned to Toka, speaking quickly in Cheyenne. Toka nodded, his face set in stone. Eliza's pulse pounded. "What are you going to do?" Wadi did not look at her. "End it." She stiffened. "There are 6 of them." Now, he looked at her. "Not enough." Then he was moving, dismounting in one fluid motion, untying something from his saddle. A bow, a quiver of arrows. Toka did the same, his movements unhurried. Confident, Eliza felt her pulse hammer in her throat. "They have guns." Wadi pulled an arrow from the quiver, his fingers brushing the shaft, testing the fletching. "Guns are loud." He glanced at her, his dark eyes unwavering. "We are not." Then he disappeared over the ridge. Toka followed. Eliza sat frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She knew what was coming. She should have felt horror, but all she felt was relief. Because Wadi was right. They could not leave men like that behind them. Maggie stirred against her. "Mama." Eliza smoothed her hair, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sweetheart, close your eyes." In the distance, thunder rumbled. Or perhaps it was something else. She did not look. She did not need to. The wind carried the scent of blood. Eliza knew without seeing. Knew by the way the prairie had gone silent, by the way the horses shifted uneasily beneath her. Maggie stirred in her arms, but Eliza tightened her hold, pressing the child's face against her shoulder. She did not want her to see. Footsteps, measured, unhurried. Wadi emerged first, bow in hand, his expression unreadable in the dim morning light. Toka followed, silent as ever, but his knife was wet. Neither spoke, neither needed to. It was done. Eliza's breath left her in a slow, unsteady exhale. It should have terrified her, the ease with which these men killed. The certainty in their movements, the cold, practical finality. But she felt no fear, only relief. She forced herself to meet Wadi's gaze. "They won't follow." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not cruelty, not pride, just a simple, undeniable truth. "No." She nodded. That was all. The morning stretched on in uneasy quiet. Toka vanished into the brush, scouting ahead. Wadi moved to his horse, checking the straps, his fingers deft and unhurried. Eliza watched him, studying the sharp lines of his face, the quiet control in his every movement. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous. Safe. But safety was an illusion on the frontier. They rode hard through the day, cutting south, avoiding the trails, avoiding the places men traveled. Maggie slept in fits, her little hands curled into Eliza's dress. The sky turned leaden, the weight of an oncoming storm pressing down on the land. By dusk, they reached the river, a deep cut through the land, its waters swollen from the past week's rains. The current churned fast and strong. Crossing would be dangerous. Wadi dismounted first, walking to the bank, scanning the flow. Toka joined him, murmuring something low in Cheyenne. Eliza swung her leg over her saddle, sliding down with Maggie still against her hip. Her body ached, exhaustion curling into her bones. But she stepped forward anyway. Wadi turned to her. "You can't cross on foot." She knew that if the river took them, there would be no second chance. She swallowed. "Then how?" Toka motioned toward the horses. "They are strong enough." Eliza's arms tightened around Maggie. The idea of crossing that water, of trusting the horse to carry them through, sent a wave of fear through her. Wadi studied her, his gaze sharp. "You are afraid." She straightened. "Yes." He nodded once. "Good. Fear keeps you alive, but hesitation kills." She said nothing. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "I will take the child." Eliza's grip tightened instinctively. His gaze did not waver. "She will be safer with me." Eliza's breath came fast. Maggie was the only thing that mattered. The only thing that had ever mattered. And now, this man, a warrior, a killer, was asking her to trust him. Not asking, telling. She should have refused. But she had seen him fight, seen his certainty, his control. And she knew, if she tried to carry Maggie herself, she might hesitate. She might fail. Slowly, painfully, She forced her hands to loosen. Maggie. Her voice was gentle, steady. Go to him. Maggie lifted her head, blinking sleepily. Then, to Eliza's astonishment, she reached out. Waddy took her with ease, settling the child against him as if she weighed nothing at all. Maggie burrowed into his shoulder without a sound. Eliza felt something inside her crack. Then there was no time for thought. Toka went first, urging his horse into the water. The current fought, pulling hard, but the animal pushed through. He reached the far bank, turned, and nodded. Waddy moved next. His horse stepped into the river, the water rising fast against its legs. Eliza watched as the current surged around them, watched as Waddy shifted his weight, guiding the animal with quiet certainty. He never wavered. Maggie never stirred. Then they were across. Eliza exhaled. She forced herself to move, to mount, to press her heels into her horse's sides. The river was freezing, rising to her knees as the horse plunged forward. The current tore at them, dragging, pushing. Her hands clenched in the reins. The animal fought, nostrils flaring, but Waddy's voice carried over the water, sharp and firm. The horse obeyed, and then they were through. Eliza slid off on shaking legs, breath coming fast. Waddy stood nearby, still holding Maggie, his arms loose but sure. He studied Eliza for a long moment. You did not hesitate. She met his gaze. I couldn't afford to. Something unreadable passed between them. A quiet understanding. Toka had already moved ahead, scanning the horizon. Waddy shifted Maggie slightly, adjusting his hold. We should keep moving. But before he could turn, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Waddy went still. Toka spun, hand flying to his knife. Eliza's stomach twisted. The bushes rustled. Then they stepped into view. 3 men. Not outlaws. Not settlers. Warriors. Cheyenne, like Waddy and Toka. But their stance was wrong, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Eliza's pulse thundered. This was different. She could feel it in the air, the crackling tension. These men were not allies. One of them spoke in Cheyenne. Toka answered, his voice calm but firm. The man's gaze flicked to Eliza, then to Maggie. Eliza forced herself to stand tall, to show no fear. Waddy shifted Maggie's weight, his stance relaxed but ready. His voice, when he spoke, was even, controlled. The warriors did not look convinced. Eliza knew then this was a test she and Maggie might not survive. Toka spoke again, but the lead warrior's face remained stone. Then, slowly, deliberately, he unsheathed his knife. Waddy's hand hovered near his own. Eliza's heart pounded. She had seen what Waddy could do, knew how fast he moved, how sure his strikes were. But 3 against 2. Maggie whimpered softly against Waddy's chest. The warrior's gaze snapped to her, and then Eliza understood. They were not questioning Waddy. They were questioning her. She took a slow, careful breath. Then she stepped forward. The lead warrior's eyes locked onto hers, his knife still drawn. Eliza lifted her chin. She would not cower. She would not beg. You want to know who I am? Her voice was steady, strong. I am the woman your own people left to die. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe, crossed his face. Eliza did not stop. They abandoned me, left me and my child in the dirt. This man, she motioned toward Waddy without breaking eye contact, did not. The silence that followed was thick. Then the warrior did something unexpected. He smiled, not cruelly, not mockingly, but with something almost like approval. He sheathed his knife. Toka exhaled softly. Waddy did not move. Then the warrior spoke. A single sentence. Waddy gave a short nod. The men turned and walked away. Eliza let out a slow breath. What did he say? Waddy looked at her. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his gaze. He said, You are not weak. Eliza swallowed hard. No, she supposed she wasn't. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. The storm was coming. Waddy adjusted Maggie one last time. Then he turned toward the horizon. We should keep moving. Eliza nodded, and without hesitation, she followed. The wind clawed at Marianne's dress, tugging it like the hands of a ghost. The wagon rumbled to a halt, wheels sinking into the muddy earth, and she knew, before her father-in-law even spoke, that this was the end of the road. Out. The word was sharp, final. She tightened her grip on Daniel, her boy's small body trembling against her side. He did not yet understand, not fully, but he clung to her skirts the way a child clings to the last light before darkness swallows it whole. Her throat closed, her voice a whisper swallowed by the wind. Please, just take us to Fort Laramie. It's not far. I set out. The old man's face, carved from years of hard living, showed no hesitation. He gestured to his eldest son, who climbed down and yanked their only trunk from the back of the wagon, tossing it into the dirt. The lid cracked on impact. She swallowed the rising panic. Nathaniel would never have wanted this. At the mention of his dead son, Silas Wilkes' mouth twisted. Nathaniel ain't here, is he? His gaze raked over her, full of quiet, simmering contempt. You should have picked better. Maybe he'd still be alive. The words struck like a slap, but she did not flinch. Not in front of them. He married me because he loved me, she said, her voice steady now. And you. She took a sharp breath, rage breaking through her fear. You are a coward. Throwing out a woman and child, leaving us to die, all because you never thought I was good enough. Silas stared for a long moment, then nodded to his son. Mount up. Daniel, only 6 years old, finally found his voice. Grandpa, don't leave us. He ran toward the wagon, but Marion caught him, pressing his face in her skirts before he could see the way Silas turned his back. Take care now, Silas muttered. The wagon lurched forward, the horses kicking up mud, and then they were gone. The boy sobbed. Marion held him close, standing in the empty silence, the vast and merciless land stretching in all directions. Alone, she blinked against the tears that threatened to come, forcing herself to breathe. Panic was a slow death, and she would not let it take her. Daniel, she whispered, kneeling so their eyes met. She pushed the damp curls from his face. We're going to be all right. The boy wiped his nose. But we don't have a horse. Or food. She squeezed his hands, his fingers cold against hers. We still have each other. She did not add that it might not be enough. The sun had begun its slow descent, stretching their shadows long across the earth. There was no shelter, no sign of life. Just the prairie, rolling endlessly, and the distant shape of the mountains, dark and unyielding against the horizon. She rummaged through the broken trunk. Most of their belongings were useless. A bundle of Nathaniel's letters, a dress too fine for the wild, a small tin of sewing needles. But there, at the bottom, her fingers found the knife. She pulled it free, holding it up to the fading light. A blade was not a rifle, but it was something. The first night was the worst. They huddled beneath a withered cottonwood, the thin branches barely offering protection from a cold. Daniel whimpered in his sleep, and she wrapped him tighter in the blanket, her own body shaking. She did not sleep. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of damp earth, and something else, something sharp, metallic. Blood. She listened. The plains were never truly silent. They whispered, rustled, sang with the sounds of creatures moving in the dark. But there, beneath it all, was something new. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. She tightened her grip on the knife. A shadow moved along the ridge. The dim starlight traced the shape of a man on horseback. He sat still, watching. Her pulse thundered. The stories she had heard since childhood came rushing back. Tales of Cheyenne raiders, scalp hunters, warriors who took what they wanted and left only bones behind. And yet, he did not come closer, did not call out. Minutes passed. The wind shifted again, and then he was gone. She did not breathe until the sky paled with the coming dawn. When she stirred, Daniel whimpered. His skin was too hot, his cheeks flushed. Fever. Terror curled in her gut. Fever, out here, with no medicine, no help. It was a death sentence. She scooped him into her arms, whispering nonsense, rocking him as though she could will the sickness away. She had to find water, had to find something to bring the fever down. She rose on unsteady legs, scanning the horizon. Then she saw it, a pouch. It sat at the base of the tree, untouched, as if it had always been there. She crouched, heart hammering, and pulled it open. Inside were dried strips of meat and a small canteen of water. Someone had left it for them. No, not someone. Him. She looked toward the ridge, but the warrior was gone. Marianne pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, then turned to her son, whispering, "We're not alone." Marianne kept the knife close, though she knew it would do little against the warrior if he meant them harm. The gift of water and food could have been a trick, or it could have been mercy. She did not know which frightened her more. Daniel stirred, his fever still burning high. He muttered something in his sleep, a plea, a cry, and she hushed him, pressing a cool hand to his forehead. His little body was too frail, too light in her arms. She could not let him waste away. The sun crept higher, and with it, the urgency to move. She could not stay here, waiting for death to come in one form or another. If the warrior had been watching, if he had left them supplies, then perhaps he knew where they could find help. With Daniel weak against her chest, she gathered their meager belongings and started walking. The landscape stretched wide and merciless, the horizon an endless line of uncertainty. She did not know where she was going, only that staying still was not an option. Hours passed. Daniel grew heavier, his breathing labored. Her legs ached, her throat parched, and doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Then, just as her strength threatened to give, she felt it, that pull, that sensation of being watched. She turned. He was there, sitting astride a chestnut stallion. The warrior watched her with dark, unreadable eyes. He did not speak, did not move, only observed. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She squared her shoulders. "If you mean to kill us, do it now." The wind carried the silence between them. Then at last he spoke. His voice was deep, measured. "You walk toward nothing." Marian tightened her grip on Daniel. "I walk toward hope." A flicker of something passed across his face. Amusement? Pity? She could not tell. He tilted his head, studying her. "The boy will not last the night." Panic clawed at her chest, but she held her ground. "Then help us." His gaze lingered on her, then on Daniel. Finally, he dismounted, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. She forced herself to stay still as he approached. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see the fine scars lining his arms, the way the sun had darkened his skin. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled free a small bundle of herbs, crushing them between his fingers. The scent was sharp, earthy. "Make him drink." He held it out. She hesitated. "What is it?" "Willow bark. It will break the fever." She studied him, searching for deception, but found none. Carefully, she took the offering and, with shaking hands, pressed the mixture to Daniel's lips. The warrior stood. "You will come." She blinked. "Where?" He did not answer. He simply walked back to his horse and mounted. Then, without looking back, he began to ride. She could not afford to hesitate. Clutching Daniel close, she followed. The journey was slow, the weight of exhaustion pressing down with each step. But the warrior kept pace, never riding too far ahead. His presence was both unsettling and strangely reassuring. He did not speak, nor did he offer assistance beyond his quiet, unwavering watchfulness. By nightfall, they reached a small, hidden camp nestled between the hills. A fire crackled in the center, casting flickering shadows against the rock. A second horse grazed nearby, and a lean-to offered shelter against the wind. The warrior dismounted, moving to tend the horses. He did not offer words of welcome, but neither did he send her away. She knelt beside the fire, cradling Daniel. His fever had begun to break, his breathing steadier. Relief washed over her, leaving her weak. The warrior crouched across from her, tossing dried wood into the flames. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly, the sharp lines of his face, the quiet intensity in his eyes. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps not much older than Nathaniel had been. She swallowed. "Thank you." He did not respond immediately. Then, "You should not be here." She met his gaze. "I did not choose this." He studied her a moment longer. "I am called to Ka." The name settled between them, a fragile offering. She hesitated, then said, "Marianne." His gaze flickered to Daniel. "And the boy?" "Daniel." Tuckota nodded. He leaned forward, pulling something from his saddlebag. a small bundle of dried meat. He tossed it to her. She caught it, murmured her thanks, then broke off a piece, pressing it to Daniel's lips. He took it without protest, too weak to do more than chew slowly. Dakota watched, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "The men who left you, they will not return." Anger flared hot in her chest. "No." He nodded, as if he had expected as much. "Then you must decide." She frowned. "Decide what?" He held her gaze, his meaning clear. "Survival." Marian looked down at Daniel, at the boy who had already lost so much. There was no returning to the life she had known. No safety in the world of men like Silas Wilkes. Her hands tightened into fists. "I will not die here," she said. Dakota's eyes flickered with something like approval. "Then you must learn." Marian took a steadying breath. "Teach me." For the first time, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Tomorrow," he said, and in the quiet, with the fire warming her skin and the night stretching endless before them, she knew this was only the beginning. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the scent of rain and gunpowder. Marian gripped the rifle tighter, her breath coming fast. The world had narrowed to this moment, to the firelight flickering against the rocks, to the weight of the weapon in her hands, to the man standing just beyond the flames. Silas Wilkes. He had found her. Dakota stood at her side, his knife glinting in the fire's glow. His presence was steady, unwavering, but she could feel the storm inside him, the tension coiling tight. He had warned her that men like Wilkes would not let go so easily. She had known he was right, and now here he was, boots planted firm, a smirk twisting his thin mouth. His revolver was loose at his side, but the real threat was the men flanking him. 3 of them, rough and mean, eyes flicking between her and Dakota. Now, Wilkes drawled, shaking his head. "You know, I'm almost impressed, Marianne. Thought for sure you'd be dead by now." His gaze flicked to Daniel, who lay bundled in the shelter, watching with wide, fearful eyes. "But you're always full of surprises, aren't you?" Marianne steadied herself. "Leave." Wilkes laughed, the sound sharp and grating. "Oh, come now. You don't really think I'm just going to walk away, do you?" His eyes darkened. "You belong to me, girl. Always have." Dakota shifted beside her. His voice, quiet but firm, cut through the air. "She belongs to no one." Wilkes turned his gaze to him, sizing him up. "Ain't that something?" The savage thinks he's got to say. He tilted his head. "Tell me, Injun, you planning to keep her? That it? Think you can claim what ain't yours?" Dakota didn't flinch. "Go." The smirk on Wilkes' face faltered. His fingers twitched near his gun. Marianne saw it happen before she had time to think. Dakota moved first. A flash of motion, his knife slicing through the air. Wilkes stumbled back, a gash blooming across his forearm. He cursed, yanking his revolver free. The world exploded into motion. One of Wilkes' men fired. The shot whistled past Marianne's ear, splintering the rock behind her. She dropped to one knee, raising the rifle, firing back. A cry of pain, one man down. Dakota lunged at another, his blade finding its mark. Blood sprayed across the dirt as the man crumpled, clutching his gut. Wilkes turned, gun swinging toward her. Marianne fired. The bullet struck his shoulder, sending him reeling back. His revolver clattered to the ground. His face twisted with rage and something else, something like disbelief. Marianne rose to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She leveled the rifle at his chest. Into Dakota said, his voice low, steady. Wilkes coughed, blood speckling his lips. "You ain't got it in you," he rasped. And maybe once he would have been right. But not now. She stepped closer, her hands firm on the rifle. She had spent too long afraid, too long running. Wilkes had stolen everything from her. Her home, her safety, her husband's life. He had left her and Daniel to die. She would not let him take anything more. Wilkes must have seen the decision in her eyes because for the first time, his smirk wavered. Then, from the corner of her eye, movement. One of the fallen men, not dead yet, hand reaching for a pistol. Dakota saw it too. He moved, fast as lightning. The blade struck true. The threat was gone. Silence fell. Wilkes slumped to his knees, breath ragged. eyes blazing with fury. He was beaten. Marianne lowered the rifle. Killing him would be justice, but it would also be the past dragging her down, chaining her to the same cruelty that had nearly destroyed her. She met Takoda's gaze. "He's not worth it." Wilkes coughed, laughing weakly. "You." She turned her back on him. Takoda gave her a long look before stepping forward. "If you return, I will finish it." Wilkes knew the truth of that. He spat blood into the dirt. Then, without another word, he stumbled into the darkness. Marian exhaled, the weight in her chest finally lifting. She turned toward Daniel. He was still watching, wide-eyed, but there was something new in his gaze. Something like belief. She went to him, pressing a hand to his cheek. "It's over," she whispered. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. Takoda came to stand beside her. "You are free." She looked at him, really looked at him. "So are you." A small, knowing smile touched his lips. The night stretched quiet and vast before them. The past had been faced. The future was theirs to decide. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Marianne knew she was ready. The wind howled across the open prairie, a cold whisper of winter's bite slashing against Sarah Whitmore's exposed skin. She tightened her grip around the frayed wool of her shawl, though she knew it was a pitiful shield against the brutal night. Her breath curled into mist as she stared at the man standing before her, the man who had once called her family. James Whitmore's face was set like chiseled rock, his lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. The rifle in his hands was lowered, but the message in his stance was clear. "You need to go," he said flatly. Sarah's arms instinctively tightened around her children, her fingers curling against the small bodies pressed against her skirts. Emma, 7, was silent, sensing the tension, while 4-year-old Caleb whimpered into his sister's coat. Sarah swallowed, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "You can't do this. The winter ain't my problem." James cut her off, shifting his weight. Behind him, his wife, Margaret, lingered in the doorway of the cabin that had once been Sarah's home. Margaret's expression held no sympathy, only a sliver of something close to regret before she turned her gaze away. Sarah looked past them, toward the dimly flickering light inside. The walls that had once promised shelter, warmth, security, now barred to her like the iron gates of a prison. Her husband, Daniel, had been buried less than a fortnight ago, his blood still fresh in the dirt where he had fallen to outlaws on the trail. Sarah had thought, foolishly, she now realized, that his family would protect them. But James had other plans. His own children to feed, his own life to tend to. "You're sending us to die," she whispered. James exhaled sharply, shifting his grip on the rifle. "Ain't no room for widows here, Sarah. You always were trouble, soft, too trusting. I told Daniel you wouldn't last on the frontier." Margaret muttered something behind him, but James ignored her. Instead, he bent down, grabbed a small burlap sack, and tossed it at Sarah's feet. The pitiful weight of it told her all she needed to know. Barely enough food for a few days, a canteen of water, and likely nothing else. Sarah clenched her jaw, refusing to let them see the tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Pride had no place here, not when the cold would kill them faster than their cruelty. She knelt, retrieved the sack, and without another word, turned toward the darkness stretching beyond the cabin's flickering light. Emma tugged at her skirts. "Mama." "Walk," Sarah said, forcing strength into her voice. "Don't look back." The first steps were the hardest. The crunch of frost underfoot, the dead silence behind them. No one called them back. No one begged for forgiveness. The cabin disappeared behind them as they trudged into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The prairie stretched endlessly, silvered beneath the moonlight. The air carried the scent of winter, sharp, biting, unrelenting. Sarah adjusted the sack over her shoulder and kept her children close. Every gust of wind clawed at them, stealing what little warmth their bodies clung to. Caleb stumbled, his little legs struggling to keep pace, and Sarah hoisted him onto her hip, ignoring the ache in her arms. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated. She had no answer. Nowhere was safe. The nearest town was days away. The Whitmores had ensured they left without a horse, without even a proper coat. She swallowed the knot rising in her throat and forced herself to keep moving. Somewhere warm, she lied. They walked until Sarah's legs burned and her vision blurred from exhaustion. The night swallowed them whole, an endless void stretching before them. The weight of Caleb in her arms grew unbearable, and she lowered him gently to the frozen ground. "We need to rest," she murmured. She found a small cluster of trees that offered little more than a windbreak, but it was better than nothing. She gathered dry branches, her fingers stiff and useless against the cold. It took 3 tries to get the flint to spark, but when the flame caught, a pitiful warmth bloomed between them. Emma curled into her mother's side, while Caleb nestled in her lap. Sarah wrapped them in her shawl, pressing her lips to their heads, whispering prayers into the night. The wolves howled at a distance. Sarah didn't sleep. By morning, the cold had seeped into her bones, her limbs sluggish as she forced herself to her feet. Caleb shivered violently, his skin pale beneath the dirt smudged across his cheeks. Emma rubbed her arms, teeth chattering. The food James had thrown at them was nearly gone. A few strips of dried meat, a hard biscuit. Sarah divided it evenly, though her stomach cramped with hunger. "We have to keep moving," she said, though her legs screamed otherwise. Caleb coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. Fear coiled in Sarah's gut. The fever had taken hold. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She gathered Caleb in her arms once more and pressed forward. The sun had risen, but its warmth was nothing against the relentless cold. Every step felt heavier. Her vision swam. Emma's small fingers clung to hers, grounding her, keeping her from collapsing under the weight of despair. Then movement. Sarah froze. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, watching. Her breath hitched. At first, she thought it was a mirage, exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But no, the man was real. Tall, broad-shouldered, draped in furs that blended into the wild. A bough rested in his grip, though he had not raised it. His face was shadowed, unreadable. Sarah's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Bandit? Scout? Cheyenne? She clutched Caleb tighter, pushing Emma behind her. Her husband's knife was still tucked in her skirt, but she knew the truth. She was no match for him. If he wanted to harm them, she had no way to stop him. The man didn't move. They stood in tense silence, the wind whispering between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned and vanished into the trees. Sarah remained frozen, pulse hammering. Her breath shuddered from her lungs as she turned, gripping Emma's trembling fingers. "Come on," she murmured. She had no choice but to keep going. By midday, her body was screaming for rest, but she refused to stop. The sky darkened with gathering clouds, promising snow. She needed shelter before nightfall, before the cold claimed them entirely. Then smoke, faint but distinct. Sarah's heart leapt. A campfire. Her instincts warred against hope. Could be trappers, could be outlaws, but could also mean survival. She crept forward, her grip on the knife tightening. Then she saw him, the same man from the trees, crouched beside a small fire. His gaze lifted, meeting hers across the distance. Sarah's breath caught. Not a mirage, not a dream. The Cheyenne warrior stared at her, expression unreadable, as if he had been waiting. The warrior did not move. Sarah's pulse thundered as she tightened her grip on the knife, hidden in the folds of her skirt. The flames from his campfire flickered in the low winter light, casting shadows over his face. His dark eyes, unreadable and unwavering, stayed fixed on hers. He sat cross-legged, his movements slow and deliberate as he placed another log onto the fire. Emma pressed against her side, her tiny fingers curling into Sarah's skirts. Caleb whimpered weakly in her arms, his fever worsening. The bitter wind cut through the trees, carrying the scent of burning wood and something else, something rich, meaty. Food. The sight of it nearly broke her. Her throat tightened as she swallowed hard against the gnawing hunger clawing at her insides. Her fingers twitched toward Caleb's limp form, his small head resting against her shoulder, too weak to lift himself. The warrior's gaze flicked toward the boy. Sarah's body tensed. She didn't know what this man wanted, why he was here, or what he intended to do. The stories whispered around campfires, in fearful tones at trading posts, flooded her mind. Savages who took captives, who slaughtered settlers without mercy. But if that were true, he would have killed them already. Instead, he reached into the leather pouch at his hip, pulled free a small bundle, and unwrapped it carefully. A piece of cooked meat, still steaming in the cold air. He placed it on the ground between them and sat back. An offering. Sarah stared at it, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Was this a trick? A test? The scent made her stomach twist painfully, made her legs shake beneath her. Emma swallowed audibly, her wide eyes darting between the food and her mother's face. She couldn't afford to trust him, but she also couldn't afford to refuse. Caleb's labored breath rasped against her shoulder, and Sarah made her choice. Slowly, keeping her movements cautious, she knelt and scooped up the food. It was warm against her palm, the grease slicking her fingers. Emma inhaled sharply as Sarah tore a piece free and pressed it into her daughter's hands. Emma didn't hesitate. She shoved it into her mouth, chewing fast, her small face crinkling in relief. Sarah fed another bite to Caleb, carefully easing it past his dry lips. He barely stirred, but he swallowed. Only then did she take a bite herself. The warrior remained still, his face unreadable, watching. Sarah swallowed hard, tasting not just the food, but the unspoken agreement settling between them. He had given. She had accepted. He rose then, towering over her, his movements slow but sure. Sarah tensed. He turned, walked toward his horse tethered just beyond the fire's glow, and returned with a fur-lined blanket. With no ceremony, he tossed it toward her. The thick fabric landed in the snow between them. A peace offering, a command, a challenge. Sarah hesitated, her mind screaming against every survival instinct, then snatched it up. The warmth of it, thick, real, nearly made her sob. Still, she kept her eyes locked on him. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked with cold and fear. The warrior did not answer immediately. He knelt once more beside the fire, his fingers turning a stick slowly over the embers. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, measured. "Tavi." The name settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Sarah inhaled sharply. The name was unfamiliar to her, but the sound of it, the weight, felt significant. She did not give her own. Tavi gestured toward Caleb with a small nod. "Sick." Sarah stiffened, her instincts screaming to pull the child closer. But there was no accusation in the warrior's tone, no demand. Just an observation. She nodded, wary. Tavi reached for his satchel once more, drawing out a small bundle wrapped in leather. He opened it, revealing dried roots and leaves. "Boil," he said, pushing them toward her. Sarah frowned, glancing down at the herbs. Medicine? She had no reason to trust him. But what other choice did she have? With her teeth clenched so tightly her jaw ached, she took the offered bundle. The hours passed in uneasy silence. Tavi remained by the fire, carving small marks into a length of wood with his knife, his movements precise and methodical. Sarah focused on Caleb, keeping him wrapped in the thick blanket, feeding him tiny sips of the warm broth she made with Tavi's herbs. Emma curled in her mother's side, exhaustion finally pulling her into sleep. The night deepened. The fire crackled. The wind howled beyond the trees, but here, near the flames, there was a fragile bubble of warmth. Sarah dozed in and out, her exhaustion pressing in like a physical weight. But she never let herself fully slip away. Tavi never spoke again, never moved too quickly. The trust between them was thin as ice. At some point, the fever in Caleb broke. Sarah woke to find his small face flushed, but no longer deathly pale. His breathing was steadier, his tiny hand curling weakly around her fingers. Relief nearly shattered her. She turned her gaze toward the warrior. He was watching. She nodded once. A small thing. A quiet thank you. Tavi inclined his head in return. Dawn rose over the frozen prairie, a soft gold light stretching across the sky. Sarah stood stiffly, adjusting Caleb in her arms as Emma rubbed sleep from her eyes. She had to decide what came next. The Whitmores were gone. There was no home to return to. She could try to find town, but alone, with 2 children in the dead of winter, her gaze flicked toward Tavi. He was packing his things, his movements smooth, practiced. He did not look at her as he secured his belongings onto his horse, tightening the leather straps with ease. He was leaving. Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding. She had no claim on him, no right to ask anything more. And yet, where are you going? Tavi paused, glancing at her from beneath the shadow of his fur-lined hood. North. A single word. No explanation. She bit her lip. Can we come? Tavi studied her for a long moment. His gaze flicked over Emma, to Caleb, then back to Sarah. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of pine, of cold earth, of something unspoken. Finally, he nodded, and just like that, they were not alone. Sarah exhaled, adjusting Caleb's weight in her arms, before falling in a step beside him. Emma trotted close at her side, her small hands slipping into her mother's. The trail ahead was long, uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, Sarah did not feel entirely lost. The wind had shifted. Sarah felt it in the way the trees swayed, in the way the horses stirred uneasily beneath the growing weight of something unseen. It had been nearly a week since she and the children had begun traveling with Tavi, and though they had spoken little, an understanding had settled between them. He led, she followed. He hunted, she prepared the food. He kept watch, she tended to Emma and Caleb. It was an unspoken agreement, one that had kept them alive. Now, as they approached the outskirts of the settlement, something inside Sarah twisted. The smoke curling from the chimneys ahead should have been a welcome sight, a promise of warmth, of shelter. But instead, her stomach clenched with unease. She had once believed that towns meant safety. That belief had cost her everything. Tavi reined in his horse at the crest of the hill, his dark gaze scanning the distant buildings. His expression did not change, but Sarah had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed at his sides when something fell off. Trouble, she asked. He was silent for a long moment before answering. Maybe. Sarah swallowed. The town below was small, little more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a muddy street. A trading post, a saloon, a handful of houses. Not much, but enough. She should have turned away. She should have ignored the pull inside her chest, the voice that whispered of the past she had left behind. But she needed answers. Stay close, she told Emma, as she shifted Caleb's weight in her arms. Tavi said nothing as they rode into town. He simply followed. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and stale whiskey. A few men leaned against the wooden rail outside the saloon, their eyes tracking Sarah as she dismounted. She felt the weight of their stares settle over her like a noose tightening around her throat. Tavi remained on his horse, his presence a silent warning. Sarah squared her shoulders and stepped into the trading post. The moment she crossed the threshold, the past hit her like a fist to the gut. The scent of tobacco, the creak of wooden floorboards, the low murmur of voices, and then a familiar one. So what's a woman like you doing this far from home? The voice was smooth, slow, soaked in the kind of arrogance that had always made Sarah's skin crawl. James Whitmore. She turned, and there he was, leaning against the counter, a whiskey bottle in one hand, his pistol belt slung low over his hips. His face was thinner than she remembered, the lines around his mouth deeper, but the smug curl of his lips was the same. Sarah's blood ran cold. James took a slow sip from his glass, eyes flicking over her, then landing on Caleb, sleeping in her arms. Didn't expect to see you again, he mused. Thought you'd be long dead by now. Sarah forced herself to stay still, to keep her breathing even. James set his glass down with deliberate slowness. What? No words for your dear brother-in-law. Behind her, the door creaked open. Footsteps. Tavi. James's eyes flicked up, narrowing as he took in the warrior's presence. A slow smirk crawled across his face. Well now, this is interesting. Sarah tensed. James straightened, rolling his shoulders as if testing the weight of his gun. Didn't take you for the kind to cozy up to savages, Sarah. Daniel would be mighty ashamed. She flinched at her husband's name. Don't, she warned, her voice low. James's smile widened. Don't what? Speak the truth. You took a step forward. You ran off with one of them. Got your kids out in the wild like animals. What kind of mother does that make you? Something in Sarah snapped. You left us to die, she hissed. The room went still. James chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, sweetheart, that ain't how I remember it. You were always too soft, too weak. Couldn't cut it out here on your own. Sarah's grip tightened on Caleb. Go home, James, she said. James laughed. Home? He gestured around. This is my home, Sarah. You. His eyes flicked to Tavi, then back to her. You're just passing through. His hand drifted toward his gun. Sarah's breath caught. Tavi moved before she even registered it. 1 second, James was standing tall, his fingers grazing the revolver at his hip. The next, Tavi had closed the space between them, his knife pressed against James's throat. The entire room held its breath. James's smile faltered. Tavi's voice was calm, steady. You talk too much. James swallowed. The air crackled with tension, the weight of unspoken threats thick between them. Then, boots on the wooden floor outside. More men. Sarah's pulse pounded. We need to go, she murmured. Tavi held James's gaze for a moment longer before lowering the blade. He didn't sheath it, just stepped back, keeping it loose in his grip. James exhaled slowly, rubbing his throat. His eyes burned with something dark. You're making a mistake, Sarah, he said. She didn't answer. She turned and stepped past him, out into the cold. Tavi was right behind her. Emma clung to her skirts as they moved swiftly toward the horses. The men outside had taken notice, their hands resting near their weapons, their gazes sharp. James stepped onto the porch behind them, voice laced with amusement. You can't outrun the past, Sarah. It'll catch up to you, one way or another. Sarah didn't look back. She hoisted Caleb onto the horse, swung up behind him, and met Tavi's gaze. Ride. They bolted from the town like spirits chased by the devil himself. The wind screamed past them, the hooves of their horses pounding against the frozen earth. Sarah didn't know if James or his men followed. She didn't care. She only knew one thing. She wasn't running anymore. She was moving forward, away from the past, toward whatever came next.